when I help, work with other founders and friends and whatnot, it's like, make sure you're timing your capital through a moment where you can get operational leverage. Like when you're actually growing, you start to see things happening. And then we also started to figure out distribution partnerships. And that was really important as well. And so that helped us get from, the first 2 customers to multiples of that. From a founder or CEO perspective, that's when you want to raise, when you can see it, when you're like, I can see the next, 2 years of this. And if we don't close money by this, it's going to be very hard to service these clients effectively. So we need to get ahead of this.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit. Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you. By the way, if you're a fan of this show, you should definitely check out the GTM Now podcast. It's hosted by Sophie of GTM Fund, and they tell the stories and tactics of how the top 1% of operators, founders, and investors build, scale, and invest. It's one of the best podcasts for founders and revenue leaders that are trying to figure out how to grow. Just search GTM Now podcast or check the show notes. Well, Doug, welcome to the show, man.
Pleasure to be here.
Dude, so you've built a pretty impressive business. I mean, you have 7 billion AUM, you were telling me, raised over 150 million in funding. I mean, it's been a long road, right? When did you start, 10 years ago?
Yeah, 10 years ago.
A decade, man, a decade. I mean, that's what, it's funny. You go into it and you think, it's going to be quick. You know what I mean? And it never is.
Right. Overnight successes take a decade,
That's right. That's right. Well, tell me a bit about Ethic. What is Ethic? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So Ethic is we partner with advisors and institutional investors to deliver very customized investment portfolios based on the issues or objectives that are very personal to that particular investor. And so the simplest use case would be, let's say you want to invest in a broad-based index, like a large cap, your S&P 500 type index, and you want to customize based on your values, your tax preferences, and your financial preferences. Our role is to then sort of effectively unwrap that exposure and then make those personalization choices and then deliver it in sort of an end-to-end user experience, and then to manage that capital on an ongoing basis.
Is it mainly about ESG, values and things like that you personalize on?
Values is definitely a big component. I mean, the areas that you really see clients personalizing around, values has been a very strong use case for us because personalization is what is personal is often values.
This would be climate friendly, things like that, those kind of values?
Yeah, exactly. So if a client wants to align to climate priorities or biodiversity issues or gender lens or a whole host of different issues, and they want to embed that in the way that they're investing and they have a thesis around that particular issue or topic, we are very, very good at that aspect. But it can also sort of broaden that to financial exposures, factor exposures, tax exposures. There's a whole host of different sort of characteristics that make up a custom portfolio. And our role is to help discover what those objectives are for clients and then to translate those into a portfolio that's actionable, and then to do that in sort of a custodial friendly way. So we are, we're US based. We sit on about 13 or 14 different custodial partners. So essentially we are sort of integrating with those different custody partners, and then we're able to deliver the portfolio management solution on top of those brokers and custodian businesses. And then we deliver, as I mentioned, the personalization across the user experience as well. So everything from the before the portfolio, so proposal generation, all the way through the transition experience, and then also the integrated reporting. So whatever the objectives of the clients are, how do we deliver something that demonstrates alignment with those particular objectives?
So what's an example of that? Somebody goes in, I mean, you partner, first of all, you partner with a financial institution, or do you sell directly to end clients?
It's all with financial institutions. So our customers are an ideal sort of customer fit for us would be a registered investment advisor here in the US, so a wealth advisor that's working with, let's say, 150 clients, managing a few $1 billion. Those clients want to embed some sense of whatever the objectives, personal objectives of those clients. And what we're trying to do then is then discover what those objectives are and help the advisors through that experience, because it's not always obvious. And then to translate those into portfolios that are personalized at each individual client level. And then we manage those as what's called a sub-advisor. So essentially we're managing that on behalf of that advisory business.
And so, yeah, maybe walk me through an example and then we'll get to how everything actually happened. But somebody will walk into a wealth manager, and what's the sort of thing they might say that would then lead them to kind of use the Ethic platform for it?
Yeah. So the best use case would be, let's say you have a wealth advisor serving a multi-generational family. That generational family is trying to engage different parts of the family. They're trying to understand what's important to the first generation, maybe have a lot of the focus on the investment aspect, and they're trying to engage with the second generation or the third generation. there's different priorities, right? So maybe there's some clients that care a lot about values. Maybe some of the other clients care a lot about tax issues within that family, essentially. And so what an advisor will do is say, okay, what does this client care about? And they'll work with Ethic. We have sort of an onboarding process where we'll help them discover what are the issues that are important to that particular client. And then we'll deliver essentially like a proposal, like a proposed portfolio saying, okay, these are the financial exposures you're looking for. Here's your tax objectives. Here are your values objectives for the clients that have values objectives. And then we're delivering that in a sort of a simple proposal on the Ethic platform. We are already onboarded with that advisor. So it's a B2B2C motion, right? So we are serving advisors or intermediaries that are then serving clients. And those clients could be families, like the example I just provided, or it could be like an endowment or a foundation. Let's say a foundation wants to personalize based on the issues that that foundation covers and where they're making gifting and those kind of things. That could be another area that a client wants to customize around. So we have a variety of different use cases, but the motion is essentially B2B2C. And then we're essentially both an investment partner and a technology partner for the investment advisor.
Got it. And so take me back to that, 2015 or even 2014, 2013 area. I mean, where does this idea come from, right? This idea of personalizing portfolios. I mean, people have been slicing and dicing, equities and portfolios in a million different ways for a very, very long time. But this sounds like maybe the origin has to do more with the ESG, the value stuff. Like in any case, walk me through how that all happened.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I go back 10 years or a bit over 10 years, I was in Australia. So my experience growing up, my father's Irish, my mother's American. I was born in Sweden. I raised in Australia, very international background. I spent the early part of my life. I grew up in a very working class area in Melbourne in the south of Australia. And when I went to university, I studied engineering, I studied commerce, and I wanted to build something. Australia does not have a very entrepreneurial sort of community. It's not really known for that. Now it's different 10 years on, but when 15 years ago or more, it really was not like that. That was not an option that I was sort of thinking about. And so I went down the path of investment banking as the vortex of talent that gets sucked out of universities is the case. And it was not exactly where I wanted to end up. But it's funny because my parents were kind of like environmentalists and definitely had like a social sort of focus as people. And so then when I went into investment banking, the ironic part about it was that a lot of the clients that we serve were natural resource clients because that's what Australia's economy is really built on. And so suddenly I ended up in this area where I'm working in sort of oil and gas investment banking, which is not exactly where I intended to be when I sort of set out on this journey. But I really enjoyed a lot of the work we were doing. It was like complex problems, smart people. But I sort of felt like after doing it for several years, this is not exactly where I wanted to end up long term. And so around that 2014 mark, I was like, okay, I want to do something different. And I remember very clearly the moment I went back and I'd been working very late as sort of par for the course or whatever. And I ripped out like a piece of paper and this notebook that I had. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do for the next 10 years? And I had this one line. I was like, keep going down the banking, private equity path, sort of that usual flywheel. So that was one path. And I thought, yeah, okay, but that's not that exciting to me. The second path was like, oh, maybe I can study more, business school, something like that. That would allow me to go move to a new country. I had a passport, US passport, because my mother's American. So I thought, oh, maybe I could do that. And then the third option was like, I could build a company. As you said, like the background here is like, it's not a very risk-taking culture. So this is like a very abnormal move.
How did that even make it on your list? Was that something you'd always thought about in the back of your mind?
It's a good question. I've been chatting with one of the guys who became my co-founder, actually worked at the same company, and we met many years before actually. And we'd sort of been chatting about the idea of starting a company, and he was based out here in the US, so had a bit more of that influence, I think, the American pioneering spirit, which I think is awesome. And so that sort of planted a seed. And then my dad ran sort of small businesses. He was a small business consultant, so he ran his own business. So he had a little bit of the entrepreneurial blood in him. And I thought, yeah, maybe I just want to build something. And I kind of go, well, the biggest risk I think in life is not doing what you really want to do. And I was at that point where I didn't have dependence. I didn't have the sort of those things that kind of you have to be a little bit more careful about later in life. And so I thought, I was in my late 20s. I'm like, why don't I go and take a swing, go build something? And then I thought, well, there's that old adage, like if you want to be an actor, you move to Hollywood, you want to build a company, the US is a pretty good place to do that culturally and because the capital markets and everything else. And so I moved out to the Bay Area. Like within 3 weeks, that piece of paper, like those circling this going, I want to start a company. Within 3 weeks, I'd sold everything, got rid of stuff, donated stuff. And I was like, all right, I'm going to move to the US.
Is that typical for you to just go all in? Because the normal thing would have been do it on the side, try it out, find somebody who wants to do it. And then maybe at some point, if things are going, move to the Bay Area, right?
Is that normal for me? No. I think this is the irony is the most important decisions you make are sometimes the ones that are it was definitely an abnormal decision.
What pulled you then so strongly towards just taking an all in kind of burn the boats decision?
The feeling, it was the most quintessential gut decision where I'm like, the biggest risk, as I said, is doing something you don't want to do.
The Jeff Bezos like regret minimization framework always sticks in the back of my mind, right?
Exactly. And it's like, go regret minimization framework, like take a swing. And like to use the Bezos quote, it's like you take a swing in sports, the most you can hit is 4 runs.
Yes.
In business, you can hit 4,000, whatever it is, right? So I looked at that and said, there's great potential here. And then I also had this in the back of my mind because I both left a job to start a company and left the country, right? I went to a place that I didn't almost know anybody. So my mother's family lived in the Bay Area, but that was kind of it. So anyway, so I moved to Atlanta in the Bay Area, and like the first few months were like definitely very uncomfortable. It's like you're used to having this like structured environment. You have like tons of stuff going on. And I like that metaphor as like when you're in a big company, it's like you got this like fire hose at you and you're like trying to work out what to do. When you start a company, you don't even know where the water supply is. Like you don't even have a map. You're like, you don't even forget a hose. Like
It's hard to realize that unless you do it, just how many things that you want to do depend on another thing, that depend on another thing, that then you have to do this random thing. You're like, oh my God, this is so annoying.
So I had that feeling. I got there. I was like, what do I do?
Yeah, like you didn't have an idea, did you? You're just like, I want to start a company at Bay Area.
I also think there's a little bit of that sort of bias you have when in the sort of the entrepreneurial journey where you're like, oh, there's one aha moment. I think it was just like you pull the thread of curiosity and see what comes. And that's kind of been my experience. And I do love just problem solving. I'm just a very curious person naturally. So when I moved to the Bay Area, that's kind of what I did. I started to build community, and my co-founder, we sort of spent time going in and meeting people and connecting and like finding problems we want to solve. And we knew it was in the fintech ecosystem because that's what we knew. One of the people that I met pretty early is a guy that runs a think tank at Stanford, this guy named Ashby Monk, who fast forward now, I'm actually part of the organization called the Stanford Long-Term Investing Initiative, which is really cool. But in 2015, he wrote this paper called Organic Finance. It was basically, the metaphor was looking at food and saying, there's this big push to have better transparency in what people are consuming in food. That is a really important thing. People are like really aware of what's going into their bodies and what's going into their children's bodies. That same thing is going to happen and is happening in financial services, where the sort of increasing commoditization and products within products, you've lost connection with what you're actually investing in or whether those things are actually aligned with your priorities and your objectives as an investor and as a person. And that became the metaphor. And it was like, okay, that is something that is really both like aligned with my experience personally, but also I think there's a great opportunity here to build something very different. And so that really became, and at the time then we were looking at accelerator programs and like, how are we going to fund this thing? Up to that point, we were pretty bootstrapped.
Did you even know what this thing was? Because that's a very high level thing, this idea. Do you have a sense of what you're going to do within that?
No, I mean, at that point, it was an idea and it was a direction. And then you start to go down that curiosity thread. And it was really like, okay, where are the biggest problem statements here? If you're trying to connect with where people are investing, what we first thought is like, okay, well, index investing in 2000 was, 1% of assets under management. You fast forward to 2015, it's approaching 50%, right? So it's almost half of all assets are invested in sort of passive or index-like products, which have a really important diversification benefit, but have this trade-off to say, well, it's not customized to what is important to you. It gets you its exposure. And so we thought, well, maybe that's an area we can start. And we started building some of our first products where get insights into how you're investing. Is it aligned with your values? Can you see what's inside it? Is it aligned how much are you paying for these products? Like all of this sort of insight into what people are doing. And then pretty quickly we said, okay, that is important, but then what do we do about it, right? So we thought, oh, well, could we help people understand what other options are out there? And so, that doesn't really make sense. So very quickly you end up in this concept of like, can you create like an operating system to personalize the way you invest? And that metaphor of like organic finance into this concept of helping people customize or personalize how they're investing really stuck. And that became then, okay, well, what we've got to do is we've got to build products that help you then understand what's in your portfolio. But then we still got to start to build these frameworks for how do you invest and how do you align it with all of these different objectives? And then how do we do all the trading and management of those portfolios on an ongoing basis? And that's where a lot of the complexity lies. Like from a fintech perspective is like actually the workflows and risks associated with managing individual portfolios that are personalized at scale is very complex.
And you're alone at this point, or you're with your co-founder? Like, how does that happen?
With co-founders.
He moved with you as well, or you met him there?
He was based here. So he was coming out from New York and we were in the Bay Area and we had those three of us. And so we were like bouncing between New York and San Francisco. And it was actually one of the other people we met pretty early along. I don't know if you know Sheil Monat from Better Tomorrow Ventures, fintech fund. He's a great investor, early stage investor in the fintech ecosystem. And he and Jake Gibson, who founded NerdWallet, they now run Better Tomorrow Ventures. But back then, 10 years ago, it was 500 fintech. And so we got into the 500 program, which was really valuable.
This is part of 500 startups.
500 startups, yes.
Which batch? I was in 500 startups, but it was 2014, I think. I don't know when you went through it, but
This is January 2016.
okay, we were close, man. We always met there. That's crazy.
Well, I mean, some of my closest friends came from that.
It was fun, man. It was fun back then. Yeah, for sure.
And it was early. It was like batches were a bit smaller, I imagine.
Yes. There's probably 30 or so companies all in the office, right? And just banging it out.
Yeah, I think it was like 30 or 40 companies, and there was less than 10 of those were fintech. So we had this little like cohort within the cohort, if you like. And the fintech track was covering all kinds of things, payments and all different other things. It's a forcing function to build. And so we really focused our efforts. We raised our first few 100,000 through the program, like going into it, and then the program itself, and then a couple investors throughout the program. And that allowed us to get to these positions where we started to build some of our early experiences and started to build what became the Ethic platform, basically. But it was still small. And we had this challenge because we serve this institutional, and we said, okay, our customer profile is going to be focused on this advisory audience because one, it aligned more closely with our experience as founders, but also because we felt it was this underserved market where the jobs to be done or the problems essentially that these folks are facing, the way we saw it from an advisory perspective is they're trying to connect better with their client to understand what is important to them. They're trying to personalize the way that they're investing. And they're trying to create this in a very seamless environment because you'd had this issue, and we like to think of it as this customization get. Like if you do something different for every customer and you're not set up from a technology standpoint, it doesn't scale. The business doesn't scale. And most advisory businesses are like, medium-sized companies. They're not, there's some big, large ones, of course, as well. We serve several of those. But in general, it's relatively small to medium-sized companies.
Did you do a bunch of like validation or talking to these customers in that stage, or did you just kind of know from your experience?
No, we did. It was a mix of like the experience we've had as founders, but then actually going and doing the customer discovery, customer development work. In that getting to the problem statement, if you like, it's sort of you go wide. You start to speak with all different flavors. And it's one of those elements where advisory firms are very different when you really get underneath it. Each firm is a little bit different. They've got their own priorities. They've got the way that they run the business. They've got different customer sets they focus on. And so from the sort of standing back, they all look similar-ish. You've got different flavors of the way that they serve their business. But when you get into it, they're extremely different. And so we would spend so much time obsessing about the customer problem, like understanding what they're going through, what are their workflows, what are the challenges they're facing, how are they connecting with their customers.
Do you have any stories from that part? Because I find, when it comes to building companies, obviously your early moves matter so much in terms of the direction you ultimately go. And a lot of what you decide to do comes from those early conversations, how many you have, who you have them with, how deep they are. Curious what you remember from back then.
If you're serving this kind of client, especially in investment management, it's very difficult to convince someone to invest millions of dollars with you when you don't have millions of dollars under management, right? Like this is just a chicken egg 0-1, classic 0-1 problem. And so one of the insights we had in this through a lot of the discovery we spent was, well, okay, it's going to be difficult because these assets are generally quite sticky wherever they're being invested. It's going to be difficult to get people to move existing dollars. But if we can help them win business, if we can help them win a client, convert a prospect, then we can win assets that way. And that was such an unlock because at the time we were saying, okay, you can switch from whatever sort of asset manager or platform you're using it today and switch towards Ethic. But it was so difficult to do that when we weren't at any scale in the very earliest days. But then we said, if we can go in with some very unique differentiated solution that we felt was maturely better than what was available, we could help you win business. And that was really some of the early wins that we had. And the first assets really came through that outside of like some sort of close connection beta customers, if you like. The first big wins that set us on the trajectory towards like a product market fit, real product market fit, were definitely those kind of wins where we could help the advisor win a new client essentially.
How did you manage to do that? Like what was it about it? What changed you making the product that actually helped them win clients?
I mean, a lot of it was the way we mapped. So a lot of our earliest clients, go back to my original element, is like personalization is what is personal. What is personal is often values. Like we did a lot of work on sort of the values discovery piece. And so one of our earliest wins was a foundation client where we were helping do a lot of deep work in mapping the priorities of this foundation, very large foundation, back to the advisor to give this sort of holistic map of what was important for this client and how the allocations were today, and then translated that to this great sort of proposal. We built this sort of proposal feature within the platform that allowed us to do like some strategy back tests and do all these different things. And so to give like a look into that portfolio, given these unique and very customized requests. And so we started to go down that element and the mapping of the data. We did all of these different elements that we felt like was just very different from the alternative. And the alternative was largely, let's say, a pooled vehicle like an ETF or a mutual fund or something like that, where essentially you have just a single strategy that goes across the entire allocation or some portion of it. And so we felt that this was very different. And then we basically joined the advisor and helped support them through that journey and sort of pitching this client effectively. And this advisor won it. It was like a very pivotal moment for that advisor. Like we helped him win this big business, and that was really important for his career. And so suddenly we then built trust because we are ultimately in the trust business. And that helped us get that first point. We go, okay, if we can repeat this, if we can create essentially a mechanism to help our advisors win more business, that's going to be really powerful for both our growth, but also the success of our customers. And so that became some of our earliest journeys. And like there was another very similar version we had of that where we were doing it was essentially a consultant, but similar type of process to an advisor working with a large single family office. Same process. Help them win assets. Suddenly one trusted that consultant. That became really powerful. So it's these sort of like insights that you only get when you actually are in there and doing.
And when was this, by the way? Like you started 2015. When did you get into 500 startups, for example?
So we raised the first few hundred K in 20, like going into the program and through the program. I had some beta customers through 2016, but we spent years building technology to help deliver that customization. By the end of 2018, we probably, so at the end of 2017, we had about 5 million under management. That gives you we were very small. End of 2018, we started to get our first few customers. We had about 50 million at the end of 2018. And going from 18 into 19 is where we really started to hit that inflection point. We got up about 250 million or so at the end of 2019 and then started on the trajectory.
And that idea that the helping advisors win business, when is that?
That's at that early, that basically sub 50 million, right? Like getting from our first few and, early customers are often like immediate community people that we've worked with, sometimes like investors or client investors, partners. And that helps you just go out and test and understand. And it's mainly for feedback. But then getting to that point where we're actually winning business, that's our first, let's call it like customers 3 through 10, that kind of window there where it really, you start to see it work and you start to see the flywheel work and we're going in there and showing how we can help win business and case studies and these kinds of things.
Like bips off the AUM?
Primarily AUM.
Which is what, sub 1% or so? Or what?
Oh, yeah.
So when you talk about 50 million AUM, right, like we're talking less than, I don't know, $500,000 ARR sort of thing, 250K.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely, and this is always the challenge around AUM business models. It's very different to software subscription models, completely different. And that's often the challenge. And frankly, going to the fundraising side, that was one of the tricky part about capital raising for the company was that there are some investors who really get the AUM model and really like it. And there are a lot of investors that really don't. And there's definitely more of the latter category than the former. It's really hard to get to scale. It's really challenging and it takes a long time. And all of that is true. It is tough. It is hard to get to scale. It is difficult. It is convincing institutional and professional investors to invest millions, tens of millions of dollars is challenging. And that's where I felt like the other element we got right, I think early was that sort of investor company fit. Some of our earliest investors, I think, really helped. We had some of our earliest checks. So we did a $7 million seed, but it was really over a couple of different tranches. And essentially in aggregate, we had a lot of individual investors who were folks that added a lot of value personally. And I found actually some of them still to be the most valuable investors on the cap table.
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
Did you run formal pitches or how did you, when you fundraise in tranches, how did that happen? Were you always fundraising?
Yeah, that's the early stage of life. You're always a little bit fundraising. I mean, it does help when a lot of the kind of folks you're speaking with as customers are also allocators, right? So there's a nice sort of double effect. So some of our early investors then also potentially became clients and we had that crossover opportunity as well. Single family offices, some angel checks, some small venture funds. The value for us in that early part where you are effectively always pitching. You are essentially, spending time with potential partners that could become investors or could stay as just clients.
But you were taking money every time, or would you do these mini rounds? Now we're doing $500,000 or whatever.
We kind of batch it and say, hey, we're going to raise a little bit more. And essentially the capitalization strategy was, right, because of the way the business profile works and it takes time to ramp assets. As I said, we spent years building technology before we really started taking assets. Because of that profile, you really had to raise enough to de-risk the business to get to the next milestone, product milestone, build milestone, traction milestone. And then we started to kind of do that. And we raised our Series A in 2019. I mean, that was led by Nika Tans Morris, and Nika is great. But prior to that, I would say is like, we definitely did a lot of tranches in that component. And it was, as I said, I think that was the right fit for us. It keeps you really scrappy though.
Yeah. How many people were you through that time, for example, 2015 to 2018?
So 2018, we were sub 20 people. We're talking about like 15.
Okay. So like that whole time, you're 5, 10, 15 sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. In the early days, you're like a couple of people, just the founding team, and then the first few employees. And like by 2018, we're like sub 20 people basically. And we started to go, and then post Series A and then even to Series B, we started to like really burst the walls a little bit at this. I'm actually at the old office today, but it was definitely challenging at that time in terms of fitting everyone in. But in that motion where we were like going from getting into that Series A mindset, that was actually that was a tough, like going from seed to A is one of the more challenging. I'm sure a lot of folks that you know well and work with, like that is a very difficult drop-off rate.
It's a crazy drop-off, man. It's funny actually too, and that data is worse now than it was, I think, post-COVID. Like if you look at the overall, about 45% of seed companies make it to A, given an unlimited amount of time, right? But 2 years in, it used to be like a few years ago, it was about 30 to 35% of seed companies that get to A after 2 years. Now it's 15% in the last cohort. So it's dropped like a lot.
What do you see in the success stories in that conversion then? I mean, I'm happy to talk about our journey in that, but like, what do you see as those attributes to make the minority of that?
There's just the timing has to do so much, right? So like you look at the COVID years, and frankly, it was very easy to raise an A, relatively speaking. These kind of last few years, the bar has just gone up a lot. And the ones that have made it, part of it, again, is timing in the sense that if you're doing things with AI, it's just been so much easier now than if you're not. But that's only true as of the last couple of years. I think in a Series A, the number one thing you can always count on is insane growth. I mean, the ones that are growing really fast, regardless of everything else, tend to raise an A. But it's not true that the ones that aren't don't, because there's so many other reasons why you'd want to back a company that early. Now, the core, I think, principle in this, hence the show, right, is fundamentally proving product market fit. And I think that's the key thing. And I say that in both senses, like in a perfect world, only the companies that have, maybe there's exceptions, but in general, only the companies that have product market fit would get funded. And only the founders that have product market fit would want to raise a 10, 15, $20 million Series A, because frankly, if you don't have it, it's a lot of money to have. And unless you're just very like strong-willed and able to just bank it and only use what you need, in reality, most founders that don't have product market fit but have 15 million are going to spend it. And if you don't have it, it's not gonna get you what you think it's gonna get you.
You know this well, obviously. Like I find it different variants of product market fit, because you have the one where it's like the hair on fire problem, where it's like very competitive and everyone's kind of solving it and coming in. I think we fit more into the category of that hard fact issue, which is like, you're trying to build the market for customization and how you can solve this and do it differently to how it's been done before, which had its own challenges. And like, my experience there is like the technical challenge was very real, because and the go-to-market challenge, the 0 to 1 problem of how do you get scale to get assets, because people don't want to invest until you're at a certain scale and have history and all these kind of things. And as I said, that unique insight we had, I think, around helping advisors win business, and that being really the initial set of customers and using that to show the traction that we need to raise more capital, whether that was another sort of seed round essentially, or whether it was going into our Series A, that was like very much. And then, for our world, there's like distribution, right? Like distribution is such a huge part of it. Is once you've got that technical moat, once you have that from a product perspective, is can you get distribution? What we found is we had to kind of reinvent a little bit to think about distribution, because typically in financial services, you have sort of the wholesaler model. So people used to go out and sell ETFs or mutual funds. We have a very consultative model, because we were going in there discovering what the clients care about. We're setting them up from a technology perspective and then building these portfolios and sort of workflows around it. That was quite different. So we found like there was actually a talent challenge, trying to find the right people as well.
This is post Series A you're talking about?
Yeah, like basically post Series A or around the Series A time, like kind of pre-post that area. Like it's basically when you do your first true sort of sale or business development hire. Like that, I think actually that is right, because you have to then productize, or you have to create the roadmap of like how your product works and how someone can come in and step in and solve it. And we weren't your sort of SaaS salesperson and used to that. And we definitely weren't your wholesaler model. We were neither of those. And so we had to kind of invent a little bit the playbook about how our customer discovery worked and how you as like a relationship manager or a business development person would step in and be able to work with this kind of customer, work with investment advisors and institutional investors that have very bespoke needs. And that was also an interesting like win. I think we spent so much time obsessing about how to get that model right that we felt like and again, at the time, like a little bit like the fundraising, like you can see him at the time, like, oh my gosh, we're spending so much time on this and it's really draining. But the grittiness that you get from that, and I think as I said before, like building transformational companies takes decades. Like I don't see that there's any shortcut to that. And I think a lot of these learnings you kind of have to take in some ways the hard way. Like you can try to learn from peers and whatnot, but a lot of them is just by...
Sometimes you got to do it yourself, 100%. Curious to dive into like that 2016, 2018 period when you're just mainly building from a few different angles and take it however you want to take it. But it's interesting, like with the PMF show, I speak with obviously a lot of successful founders, and there are many that had effectively like some form of a long build period, whether it was by design or not. But me as a VC, it's a tough period because everybody can build, like frankly, you know what I mean? Everybody can build product and everybody can, and I say everybody and obviously like in air quotes, but in general, that's not the hard thing, like showing progress and building a product. The hard thing is finding product market fit and ultimately traction and all these sort of things. And so it's kind of like, on the one hand, I know that there are companies that do need to do that and it takes time and ultimately leads to success. But when you're actually going through that time, and I'm curious your experience going through that time, there's a lot of doubt, like inherent doubt of, man, like, what am I doing here? You know, like first of all, there's companies that are growing really fast. Second of all, I'm sure when you were 2016 in 500 startups, you thought it would be much faster than it was. Like, and so you've got to reconcile all these things. Just curious if you could tell me more about that build period and what that was like.
I could spend an hour just talking about that. There's so much there because like you're 100% right. It's like you're in this motion where you're building towards a vision. And in our kind of world where it's how do you show traction really, like in terms of assets under management, because of this sort of chicken egg issue where it's like until we feel we are so much more advanced in what the alternatives are, it's extremely difficult to go in at all. We can't go and do the sort of move fast and break things type software mindset because you can't do that in institutional capital management. And so definitely like, you know, you kind of go, oh my gosh, is this the right thing? Are we on the right direction? Are we going to get to product market fit? Because you can do all the customer discovery calls in the world, but until you actually transact, until you actually cross over that hurdle where you're actually managing capital and you're working with that client, you can get, oh yeah, definitely, we could definitely help. We could be part of this. And it's a very, I think as a founder, it's probably the most lonely time because one of the elements is like, you can't look at what other people are doing because you don't know what sits behind that. So you can go and see other companies that are out raising and read TechCrunch. So I just try to ignore all that because it just doesn't help you. It doesn't advance our mission. It doesn't advance what we're doing. So let's just focus like every day on execution. Let's just be better every day. We'll capitalize the companies we need it. We'll bring in strategic investors that understand our space and can help us with things like distribution. What we found also in getting up to that 2019, I know we're talking 2018 and earlier, but when we started to get to the 2019, then we saw, okay, what we need to do is bring strategics onto the cap table because that can help us with this, like scaling our product market fit issue. So that was always one of the things we were thinking about all along. But it's definitely a very challenging, and like I can see from a venture lens, it's like hard to like separate builders, right?
Well, like what kept you going through that? Like, were you confident that this is going to lead to the promised land, or was there serious doubt or some phases of ups and downs where you're kind of like, yeah, I don't know.
It's always the up and down, mate. Like, you know, in hindsight, you look back, go, oh yeah, we did this. And you're like, oh, it was the good old times. And you're like, no. Like there was so challenging where you're like, you've got, you know, short on runway and you're having to like go and raise funding and then going to build stuff. And then, you know, you also like getting rejected a million times, you know, that's always a real challenging.
How many investors did you pitch, for example, through those fundraisers?
Oh, well over 100. And a very small portion of those ended up investing. So but that's just par for the course, right? Like that's what normal is, I think anyway. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but I think normal is meeting with a lot of investors. And I think actually the benefit of doing that is because you're also doing the reverse DD, if you like. Like you're looking at them as like, is this investor who's going to be with us for the entirety? Are they going to help? Are they going to help us really unlock the value that we believe we can unlock? And so you get both of those sides. You spend a lot of time with investors and you get to learn them. You get the rejection, of course, but then you also get the other side of it, which is you start to get a feel for like, what are the investors that are are really good for us, and also the people who are a good fit for me as CEO or us as a founding team.
And you found the investors really made a difference? Because sometimes that gets overhyped, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, these investors are going to add value. And then they just, sit and, go invest in other things.
I hate to say it, but I think the venture investors that have to sell their value add are often not the ones that are the value add. The ones that are the value add are often the people who have been builders before. The people can empathize with the early stage experience, the ones who've been through that, who understand so much of that 0 to 1, especially when in that 0 to 1 phase. That there's a category of investors that are really valuable there. I think the other category of investor that's really valuable are the people that understand your market really well, right? They can help you either with that initial sort of 10 customers or 20 customers, or can understand the product experience in a lot of intricate detail. And, we had some great fintech investors early on. I mentioned a couple earlier who understood the business, who understood what we're trying to build, who believed in what we're trying to do, and could help us with those early kind of customers. And when I do these days, fast forward, I help some of our venture investors and then speaking to portfolio companies and whatnot. And I'm like, everyone will pitch you the value add, but the ones who really add value, the ones who either are happy, they're either your first call when you got a real problem, or they're the ones that help you get customers. The ones who help you get customers are so valuable because they're the ones who are like, hey, we'll go to a reference call and yep, you're early, but we'll help, we'll say, support you and we've got capital behind you. And that mattered a lot. And those are the ones that I think I have the most gratitude for, if you like, the investors that I think were the most, the truly actually added value, especially in that early phase, because later on it becomes very different. The support you need, the Series B, C, and, we've passed the Series D milestone at this point. It's very different than what we did when we were like, 10 people in a room kind of thing.
In that 10 people phase, like when you're building, do you kind of have a feature parity situation and you just know where you're going to need to get to? Or are you kind of in this motion of customers tell you need ABC, so you build ABC, and then they tell you actually I need DEF, so you build DEF? Do you know what I mean? Like which of the two models are you running?
Definitely the latter.
Okay.
I remember there was times where we were like, literally would build stuff like from one day to the next based on like a meeting going, oh, this client's looking for this thing. Oh yeah, I think we could probably, and like hack together something and go test it again. And so it was very much like as agile as we could possibly.
Any mistakes made in that? Like, did you overbuild? Did you find you build things and then ultimately you didn't get the sale that you thought you would get? Like, what were the learnings from there?
Yeah, some of the learnings were also things like, oh, we integrated with a custodial partner that's not well adopted, or things like that, because you don't know where some of these areas where you're like, oh, we'll go spend time with this custodial partner, and then you realize actually the market that you're solving for is on this other one, and so you spent time over here. And like, yes, you look in hindsight and go, that was important, but I also go, that's kind of part of the journey. You have to meander a little bit. Like, I think it's never going to be this element where you like nail the customer journey out of the gate and like get all the feature requests right and like build the product exactly. Like you have to have these like mistakes along the way and go, oh, we built this feature and functionality. I remember some of the early ones where, we thought, oh, well, we could embed some of these workflows that are like off what we're doing into our customer journey. And we built that way too early. And then it ended up being like, you know what, that's not, people aren't using it. That's not the good use case. Let's focus on like narrow and deep what we're really good at. I think one of the other things that we did very well is focus as a company. Like we were very, very focused on the customer segment, on what we're trying to solve for, on their problems. Like that became very much part of the DNA of the company, because it's very tempting in that building phase, like you were talking about, to like go and start building an entirely different customer problem set, because you're like, oh, we haven't seen the traction here, or we haven't been able to get to this point. And you're like, okay, maybe we should change. Maybe we should go to retail. Maybe we should go. And like we stayed very, very focused despite all of those elements. And like to give you the context at the time, 5 years or more before us was like the robo-advisor phase. Some of the early robo-advisors started to scale up. So there's a big direct-to-consumer push. And so that had like got traction, and that was like very well funded. And so then it was like, oh, well, is that a world we want to go in? And there were some of our competitors that started at a similar time that went off into the direct-to-consumer route and then eventually made their way to advisory. But we stayed very much focused on the advisory space and what then became institutional space over time. And that really served us well, because it meant that the customer journey we were building around was very consistent.
When was the most insane growth? Like you were at 50 in 2019, you're at 7 billion now, 6 years later. What was that kind of curve like?
So yeah, between 2017, we were a handful of million under management at the end of 17, 50 million. At the end of 2019, we're about 250 million. So going from 18 and 19, that was a huge year in the early phases.
And what clicked? What specifically happened in that year that you would say was the thing?
It was a mix of things. So that insight we had in 18 really, which was this, how do we help advisors win business and how do we really show that works? that was extremely helpful. The other thing is we started to get distribution right. Like I was saying before, the way our distribution work, we really spent a lot of time iterating on how we actually do the entire sales process and how we work with clients to get them set up and all of that. So that started to click. And then we also started to figure out distribution partnerships. And that was really important as well for the industry we're in. And so that helped us get from, the first 2 customers to multiples of that.
Tell me about distribution. Like people talk about this high level of time, you know what I mean? Like you got to get the go-to-market right. You got to get the distribution right. Like what specifically would you say that you got right?
So one of the big partners we had, it was a big financial institution. And like we've worked with them for a long time and they came on the cap table. And like what we had is like, can we leverage that partnership to help us grow more? Can we leverage some of the way that they are already, because they're also in this mindset. If you look at most financial services, they're wanting to innovate. And it's always very challenging. Same problem you see in most industries. It's like hard to innovate around because it's hard to build new things and they have a certain way of doing it and they've been doing that way for decades. And so we started to partner with folks who we then, shared some of the revenue with, but we were essentially able to leverage and get much more sort of well-known in the industry and then also help us really convert customers much quickly. Because the RA market, which is a lot of our customers today, it's quite independent, it's quite fragmented. It's not like in software land, if you're selling from within the startup ecosystem where you're sort of one investor has all these portfolio companies and they can, some subset of them could be customers. Like that's not ours at all, right? We're serving very different types of customers. And so we need to work out these nodes of influence. One of the things that I think the insight on the go-to-market that we had, and we still use it very much today, is you look at the stack, right? So if you think about a wealth business that is an executive team, an investment team, an operations team, the advisory team, and then the end client. These are all the different personas within the firm, all the different sort of roles to be played in within the firm. And then you have these different types of firms and they play it away. If you want to have real success, you've actually got to activate each of these different levels. Like you have to make sure you're connected at the executive level. You have to make sure.
It's kind of your classic enterprise sales, motion.
But I think that is not as well adopted in some of the world that we're in. It's much more adopted in enterprise software than it is in advisories in the wealth space. I think we did a very good job of that, right? Like I think early on, especially, we started to really say, hey, do we influence all of these different areas to get the full push behind the firm, essentially. You innovate in your product, you also innovate in the way you distribute, like how you think about it, the channels you go down, the types of partners you work with, whether you're going direct, whether you're going through another partner. Like we've tested lots of these things and you run these experiments and say, does this work? Does this not work? A lot of our businesses, and that's true about a lot of folks, it's referral. Like if we do a great job, then hopefully that client will sort of refer that and we get well known for that and you build a reputation around that and that ends up being your go-to-market like flywheel. It's not paid model at all. So that becomes really powerful if you can really nail that.
And was that how you got that Series A, like that distribution really starting to work and kind of the numbers coming up?
Yeah, because in 19, we closed our Series A in like the middle, I think we announced it in like the second half of 19. So it was like, that was the window there where we were kind of going from, a handful of assets sold over to up to over 250 million. Like that really helped us propel us through. And I think, this in the venture world, like one of the things that's very important to help people is capital raise timing. Like it's not just important as, like you said before, timing so crucial in the macro environment, but it's also crucial in the micro level. And when I help, work with other founders and friends and whatnot, it's like, make sure you're timing your capital raise through a moment where you can get operational leverage. Like when you're actually growing, you start to see things happening really well.
The momentum is what drives the FOMO and the FOMO is what closes deals. There's just no doubt about it.
But then also having a real timeline that's tied to operational milestones, right? You're like, I need to close this round because we are onboarding these customers and I need to ramp up our go-to-market team by this, therefore, and you can see it there, right? And that I think is very important because it shows there's like a very real timeline. It's not this sort of artificial, like, oh, well, I want to close by X because it's a nice round number. You're closing it based on a milestone that matters for your business. And I think that's an important like timing. And also it makes sense, right? Like if you're from a founder or a CEO perspective, that's when you want to raise, when you can see it, when you're like, I can see the next, 2 years of this. And if we don't close money by this, like it's going to be very hard to service these clients effectively. So we need to get ahead of this. It's a nice forcing function to get these rounds to come together.
Perfect. Well, listen, let me stop it there and I'll ask the final 3 questions we always end up on. First one being, when was the moment for you where you felt like you had found true product market fit?
It was the moment where we really saw that conversion of helping our advisors win business. Like that's what sticks in my mind when I think back to it. And I would say in a conventional sense, that's probably a little bit before seeing all the metrics come. But as soon as you saw that early win, I go, we can replicate this. I know how to do this. We know how to do this. That was definitely the moment. And then it really played out in the metrics weeks in late 18 into 2019.
And the second question is, was there a moment where you thought maybe things just wouldn't work out? The company might actually fail?
You always have doubts as a founder in the early, especially like you have these moments where you're like, wow, this is really tough. It's very hard to build companies. It's why only a few people do this, are crazy enough to do it. So many of those. And I'm a big believer in sort of Stoic philosophy. It's like control what you can control, focus on what you can control. So like, don't let your mind get caught up in thinking about, well, what if we don't do this? Or what if we don't do that? It's like, okay, I can't control that. Let's just focus on the customer and we'll build. And that'll be our single source of truth.
The last one then, if you could go back 10 years ago and kind of give yourself a piece of advice, what might that be?
Could I have like a laundry list? Like, it's so much of the people. We didn't talk a lot about the people, but it's also so much about the people you surround yourself with. And that's like your team, that's your investors, that's your customers. Like that, I think, is the most important part of the journey, is really focusing on the people and getting the people right. And I think we have done a really good job of that over the years. There's a certain naivety as an entrepreneur that you kind of have to just keep convincing yourself to try and do these impossible things all the time. And so if you knew all of those things, I don't know if that's a good thing. I think it might be better not to know them in some ways, where you're like, oh, I didn't realize how difficult it would be to do these things. Because if you knew how difficult it was, and maybe it was more challenging that you'd want to endeavor, and something that would put you off wanting to do it entirely. So there is some joy and importance of just like that beginner's mindset that allows you to just go and experiment. So anyway, I have a lot of lessons I've learned for sure, but I think that element around people, and then also just like that experiment mindset for sure.
Perfect. Well, Doug, thanks so much for sharing the story, man. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thanks, Pablo.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. Send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.